How is everybody doing? Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're taking a look into the case of Allison and Gerard Baden-Clay. I want to warn you, during this video, I will probably say his name Gerard, but I think it's Gerard. So, Gerard, I apologize. I'll try my best not to botch his name. Moving on. Allison was murdered by Gerard, the father of her children. And of course, like many others, he tried to portray the devastated, grieving husband, tried to squeeze those crocodile tears, but was bad at it. And then he got caught. Want to know how things unfolded? But first, let's start from the beginning. In 2012, Allison Baden-Clay went missing. 11 days later, her body was found and her husband was charged with the murder of his wife. But let's get to know who was Gerard and Allison. Allison June Dickey was born on July 1st, 1963. She had two siblings. She loved ballet, and she hoped someday she would open her own ballet studio. Allison spoke Japanese, Dutch, French, German, and Swedish, besides English. In 1994, she won the Miss Brisbane beauty pageant. Allison worked as the head of human resources at the flight center at the airport. Her friends described her as loving, caring, beautiful. She was fun. She adored her daughters, whom she had with her husband, Gerard Baden-Clay. Gerard was born on September 9, 1970, in Bournemouth, England. He had two siblings. He grew up in Zimbabwe. When he was 10 years old, Gerard and his family moved to Australia. Gerard studied accounting when he left school. Gerard worked in flight center as well. He loved attention. He loved status. Gerard's great-grandfather was the founder of Scouts, Boy Scouts of America, Robert Baden-Powell. So he loved the prestige that came from it. He was described as someone who was self-confident, but some people would put it as self-absorbed with a big ego. While both Allison and Gerard worked for Flight Centre in Brisbane, Allison and Gerard met. In 1997, the two got married and then moved to England. But in 1999, they returned to Australia. In 2004, both worked for Century 21 Real Estate Company, where Gerard was the managing director, and then he became a partner and handled the finances of the company. Allison eventually returned to Flight Centre. At the time of her death, she was an executive. Gerard and Allison Baden-Clay had 3 children, all of them girls. Allison's friends didn't like Gerard. They thought he wasn't good enough for her. They thought he wasn't genuine, he was inauthentic. And he always gave that impression of thinking of himself as superior than others. The friends also didn't like the way Gerard treated Allison. He was emotionally cruel to her. He often told Allison he didn't love her. He told her she was a horrible cook, and he called her lazy. Even though Gerard liked to put an image of a happy couple and that he was a loving, devoted husband, things were far from the truth. Apart from being emotionally abusive, Gerard was also, of course, a cheater. During his marriage to Allison, he had multiple affairs, but one of them would stand out, and this affair lasted up until Allison disappeared. Gerard was such a disgrace of a partner, he actually cheated on his mistress. Gerard and Toni met in 2008. Toni was married and had children. At first, Toni was a client, but then she became an employee. Toni admired Gerard. She thought he had integrity. This one is funny. She was attracted to him and she tried to fight it off. Apparently not enough. Gerard and Toni became close and they confided in each other. Toni's relationship with the father of her children started to crumble, and Gerard was there for her. He supported her, and he even shared his marriage troubles, saying he didn't love his wife and he was just in it because of the children. He wasn't happy. He gave her the typical lingo of a married man who wants to get into someone's pants. He didn't like the wife, was in it for the children, and Toni fell for it. She fell for it good. Toni left her husband and children to be with Gerard. In her mind, she was in a loving and caring relationship with a man who was cheating on his wife. Well, what makes you think if he cheats on her with you, wouldn't he cheat on you with someone else? And indeed he did. Gerard would tell Toni he was going to marry her someday. He wouldn't leave at the time because Allison supposedly suffered from depression. But in 2011, Allison found out about the affair, and instead of ending the marriage like he promised, he dumped the mistress. How about that? And she also lost her job. She then went to work for Remax, a friend of Gerard's helped. Gerard and Allison went to marriage counseling and had no plans to divorce. However, Gerard went back to his old tricks and he got in touch with gullible Toni, and he romanced her back into a relationship by not wearing his wedding ring. He said he loved her and that he was planning on leaving his wife. The same thing he had told her before. She believed him then and she believed him now. Gerard told Toni Allison was checking his phone calls, his text messages, and had placed a curfew on him. He also created an email account so the two would communicate without Allison's knowledge. While in public, Gerard and Toni would be affectionate to one another, and at the same time he wanted to keep his image within the community, the image of a devoted husband and father. His ego needed it. Allison was completely unaware Gerard had rekindled the affair with Toni. But something happened on April 19, 2012. While the two were having a conversation, Gerard he warned her she and Allison would be at the same time and at the same place the next day. And this didn't please Toni. So she questioned him about their relationship, and of course Gerard deceived her one more time, saying that he loved her, he was going to leave Allison, and he was going to marry her. But Toni then pressured him a little bit more and asked him about the plan for leaving his marriage. However, Toni never realized or didn't want to realize Gerard was in love with one person and one person only, himself. At the same time, Gerard's work and finances were in shambles. Gerard owed a lot of money to several friends and business associates. He let his partners know the company was in a financial trouble, and the partners were surprised because they had had a great year. So where was the money? They had to borrow it. From that moment on, the other partners agreed all partners needed to sign checks going out. Gerard was upset. He felt his partners didn't trust him. Rightly so. Gerard's life was a sham. He owed money and his business was crumbling. And on April 20th, 2012, it would take a turn for the worse. On the morning of April 20th, 2012, Gerard called the police saying his wife was nowhere to be found. She had gone for a walk but hadn't returned. A police officer went to the house, and when he got there, he noticed Gerard had scratches on his face. He asked him about it, and Gerard said it was from shaving. And the officer didn't believe him and called his superior. When he arrived at the scene, he noticed there was a man placing a vacuum cleaner in the back of the vehicle, and this man was Gerard's father. They also noticed the house looked like someone had tried to clean it up. The sergeant on the scene decided the house was a crime scene, and the investigation to the disappearance of Allison Baden-Clay began. Initially, the police thought it was a case of domestic violence, but the police was very suspicious of Gerard's behavior and his explanation or lack of thereof. They asked neighbors if they had seen anything. Hundreds of volunteers and police searched for Allison through the difficult terrain. They searched the mountain forest in the D. Aguilar National Park. Firefighters also searched closed mine shafts. The police set up a mannequin in the backyard with the same outfit Allison was wearing. The entire community searched for Allison as she was loved by them. The police also searched for her phone, hoping it was with her. But what was interesting in all of this was Gerard's behavior. While he gave interviews and tried to portray the devoted husband, Gerard didn't participate in the search, and the police found this weird. Gerard was also treated at the hospital for his injuries. He had scratches on his face, chest, and hand. And to explain this, Gerard told the police the scratches on his face came from shaving, the scratches marks from his chest was from a caterpillar, and the cut on his hand was from changing a light bulb. My question is, how the hell a caterpillar can scratch you like that? What the heck, Australia? You and your weird bugs. Australia, you terrify me. So, regarding the scratches on his face, a doctor who examined him at the hospital said the scratches weren't consistent with shaving, but he couldn't be certain of where they came from. Experts told investigators there were no caterpillars in the area which could do that. Investigators found Gerard had Googled suspicious stuff, legal definitions like right to silence when Allison disappeared. The police also found evidence Gerard had had multiple affairs, and one of them was with Toni, Gerard's mistress, and of course they interviewed her. The day Allison went missing, Gerard told Toni he was being investigated, and he kept on calling by using a payphone so he wouldn't be discovered. Toni didn't believe Gerard had anything to do with it, so she thought Allison had run away. While Toni was being interviewed by the police, Gerard wanted to know what she told them. If she had told them they were having an affair, and she said yes, which contradicted what Gerard said to the police. The affair was over and his marriage to Allison was fine. While investigation continued, the forensic team searched the house and the real estate business of Gerard, looking for evidence and clues. They collected laptops, computers, hard drives. They took Gerard's razor blade, which had no evidence of blood on the razor. An officer found blood stains in the car and also a strand of hair. Both of them were tested and matched Allison. This was the first breakthrough of the case. According to Gerard, on April 19, 2012, after the kids were put to bed, Allison questioned him about the affair. Their marriage counselor advised them to talk about it, but Gerard left and went to sleep. When he woke up the next day, Allison was gone, and then he called the police to report her missing. Sadly, on April 30th, 2012, Allison's body was found at the Colo Creek. She was found along the muddy banks of the creek. She was wearing exercise clothes. She was lying on her side, and her blue top had been pulled over her head. Her body was decomposing, so she was identified through dental records. The police told the news to Gerard to see his reaction, and although he pretended to be the grieving husband, Gerard was actually making calls to claim life insurance policies on Allison. He was for sure a person of interest, and the investigation was focused on him. While still investigation continued, the police learned from interviewing other individuals from Gerard's life. In 2009, a woman named Melissa, who did business with him, was asked by Gerard to go work with him, and she refused. And then he told Melissa he was looking for someone to kill Allison. Melissa asked him why, and he changed the subject. Unfortunately, she didn't report it to the police, even though there was nothing the police could do at the time. When the police found Allison, she had leaves in her hair. An expert in the field examined those leaves and established that only 2 of the 6 species found in Allison's hair belonged to Colo Creek, but all of them matched to the leaves in the backyard of the Baden-Clay residence, which suggested Allison was killed there. The police believed after Gerard killed Allison, Allison, he dragged her across the backyard and lifted her body into the car. This was a crucial evidence for the case. So on June 13, 2012, Gerard Baden-Clay was arrested and charged with the murder of Allison Baden-Clay and interfering with the corpse. Gerard pleaded not guilty. During trial, the jury found out about Gerard's affairs. Toni testified. They also learned about Gerard's financial problems, which could have been a motive for the crime. The prosecution also presented Allison's diaries, which showed a sad, lonely woman who was heartbroken with the state of her marriage, but still wanted to make things work. Regarding the scratches on Gerard's face, it is believed she fought hard for her life. Gerard also testified. He said everything he said before were lies, but this time at the trial, he was going to tell the truth. I think his ego transcended his body. But let's see what he said. Gerard stated he couldn't have killed her and then dumped the body because he would never leave his daughters alone in the middle of the night. In my opinion, I think they argued. They went outside so the kids wouldn't listen. He killed her, then he dragged her body, he dumped the body, and the kids were asleep at the time. Gerard also said he had affairs, but he would never leave the marriage because all the affairs, including the one with Toni, the mistress, were meaningless. And he actually tried to implicate Toni might have had something to do with Allison's death. So much for integrity, Toni. Isn't he a catch? At the end, the jury didn't believe him. And on July 15th, Gerard Baden-Clay was found guilty of murdering Allison, and he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. But the tables turned. In August 2015, the defense filed an appeal. They stated Gerard had unintentionally killed Allison during an argument. He then panicked and tried to cover up, and this worked. And on December 8th, his conviction was downgraded to manslaughter. The court stated the evidence couldn't exclude a reasonable hypothesis that it could have been an accidental death. The prosecution didn't rest there. They appealed to the High Court in July 2016. The High Court questioned the defense on why they changed their strategy. Initially, the defense argued Gerard had nothing to do with Allison's death. Gerard testified he had nothing to do with it. But suddenly they changed their narrative. The High Court ruled the appeals court erred in this matter. So on August 31st, 2016, the High Court of Australia restored the original trial murder conviction. Till this day, Gerard never said why he killed Allison. So I want to read your opinions on this one. Why did he kill her? What happened? What's your theory? I think Gerard was in a corner financially, and he was also pressured by Toni to decide when he was going to leave Allison. All of this combined led to him finding a way out. He would pay his debt with insurance policies and keep his mistress. He also cheated on. On that night, he and Allison argued. They went outside so the children wouldn't listen. Allison fought back. She scratched him. He killed her in the backyard. Then he dragged her and dumped her body on the creek. Then he came back and pretended she left and portrayed the grieving husband. He was callous, egotistical, and cruel. He is a murderer.
I trust that the police are doing everything they can to find my wife, and we just hope that she'll come home soon.